So friends, I have Dr. Will Coleman here, who is a professor at ITC in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was an inspiration to me for a class called a class that I took at ITC called The History of the African American Church. And he walked through the history of Africa, of Africans deriving from the continent of Africa all the way to America. And so, Dr. Coleman, I'm happy to have you here to do this interview with me on today. We started teaching a class called The African Origins of Christianity, and we dealt with the period of 550 AD to roughly around 500 AD. All along, we kind of jumped in and out of that timeline, introducing some other components, specifically speaking of the library at Alexandria, which was built, of course, somewhere close to 3rd century BC. And we also kind of just briefly talked about the Roman Empire. We also ended on this past Sunday with the Arabic conquest of Africa, which happened 7th century AD. That said, this class is an introductory class that we more or less kind of wanted to whet the taste buds of our laity as to the contributions that the Africans made to the organization of the Christian faith. And so, to that point, I would love if you would share with us, to this point, how can we see in the 21st century the contributions that the Africans made to the Christian faith?
Yes, thank you for the introduction and thank you for that question. As you know, since you did study with the course that you mentioned, my primary thesis is that the book that we call the Bible in this English translation is actually an African-derived book. Now, the thesis has 3 components. First of all, I state that this African book on the basis of the geography, the landmass in which it was written, from Northeast Africa to as far as the outskirts, India, modern-day India. 2, the people who were originally known as the Hebrews, as Abraham, and then also known as the children of Israel, and later on known as the Jews or Judeans, were Afro-Asiatic nomadic peoples. 3, the language in which the Bible was written, really languages. 2 of them were Afro-Asiatic languages, namely Hebrew and Aramaic. And then the earliest translation from the Hebrew into Greek also transpired in the place you mentioned, Alexandria, into an idiomatic form of Greek that's thought to emulate the Hebrew. And then later on, it was translated into Latin. Now, these 3 factors are very, very important because they all transpire in Northeast Africa and originated among, again, African people. So when we talk about the origins of Christianity and the Africans in Christianity, we're not only talking about that, we're talking about the contributions of Africans to the entire Bible, and really to also the origins of what is called Western civilization. Now let's go back and look at these points in a bit more detail. One of the places where you can get evidence of the geography is to get a map and actually look at the places that are mentioned in what we call the Old Testament and New Testaments in those writings. And you'll see that the places that are described all are in either Ethiopia, Egypt, what people now call the Middle East, parts of modern-day Iraq and Iran. That takes us from the Egyptian Empire, quote-unquote, all the way up to the Persian Empire for what we call the Old Testament. So the entire landmass of the Old Testament stretches from Ethiopia to the outskirts of India. Now with the New Testament, it shifts a bit. And what it does there is that during the period of the Greeks, when they were in power, the landmass still covers the eastern part of Persia, outskirts of India. But then it shifts westward towards, of course, Greece and the northern part of Africa. And that's why Alexandria gets its name from Alexander. And that's where you mentioned the library was located. But it's also the place where the Bible was translated from Hebrew, or the Old Testament, as we call it, was translated from Hebrew into Greek. Then when the Romans came along, the empire or the geography shifts from that far eastern portion to around the Mediterranean Sea. That would be Southern Europe, Britannia, and all of North Africa. But the key and the constant denominator here is that the geography in which things are happening and taking place, the hub of it, is Northeast Africa. The second factor, the people. We first hear about the nomadic Hebrews in chapter 11 of the book of Genesis. Abraham, Sarah, their uncle, and others are migrating from modern-day Iraq, Babylon, into Palestine. And so once they're in Palestine, they also migrate for a period of time into Egypt. 400 years of Egyptian culture. So when they come out of Egypt, they are entrenched in Egyptian theology, mythology, philosophy, etc., that they then redefine to shape their own beliefs. But the people themselves are African and Asiatic. This is what's very important to remember. And even as they go into the various migrations and captivities and exiles, this is still all taking place in Northeast Africa. When they return during the period of the Persians and later the Greeks, now they gradually become more influenced by the Greek and the Romans. But they themselves, at their core, Jesus and his disciples, Paul and the earliest writers of what we call the New Testament, are still African and Asiatic type peoples. And this is true all the way through what we call the New Testament and beyond, because as they move more into Greek culture, they still try to maintain their identity, their beliefs, their ideas in a different culture. So there are the founding fathers that you mentioned and others that you mentioned were again shaping the ideas that will become a part of Christianity and Christian theology in North Africa. Third factor I mentioned is languages, and this is what's most telling. Because most of us have been only privileged to read the Bible in English, there's a way in which we might think that English is the language of the Bible, but it is not. It is a almost seventh generation translation of the original Bible. So the original Hebrew text, what we call Old Testament, was written in Hebrew and Aramaic.
Wow.
Which are related languages. Then, around the 2nd century BCE, this Hebrew text is translated into a Greek text because many of the Judeans at that time, or Hebrews, could no longer read Hebrew, but now were reading, thinking, writing in Greek. So that translation becomes what is known as the Septuagint. The Septuagint, in turn, becomes the Bible that most followers of Yeshua become more familiar with. It becomes part of what's going to be the first Christian Bible. But it's not called a Bible yet. It is considered sacred, but it's not a Christian Bible yet. It's still, in its Greek and in its Hebrew forms, a Jewish book. Now, after specifically the writings of Paul, the first century of the Common Era, Christianity, or what's going to become Christianity, begins to take shape. He writes in Greek, but he's also fluent in Hebrew and identifies himself as a Hebrew of the tribe of Benjamin. Other writers write the Gospels later on after Paul's epistles are written, and that becomes the core of manuscripts that are being circulated among followers of the Nazarene. It isn't until the 3rd century, and you know this, that we began to have the full materialization of a Christian Bible, first in Greek. It includes that Septuagint that had been translated from Hebrew into Greek, and writings by Christian authors in Greek, some of which don't get included, by the way, that we're discovering now. Now, that is going to be the first Christian Bible in North Africa. This is important again to underscore this. It's in North Africa. We have the first Christian Bible. It's not in English because the language that we now speak did not exist on the planet. This is another important point. There was no such thing as English at that time. If you wanted to read the Bible, if you wanted to be saved, then you had to know Hebrew or Greek, because those are the only two languages in which the emerging Bible was written and read. By the 4th century of the Common Era, the Hebrew and Greek texts are then translated. They have been translated along the way, but specifically, they are now translated by a man named Jerome into Latin. And then the Latin Vulgate, that's what it's called, the Latin Vulgate becomes the Bible of the West for almost 1,000 years. Before, subsequently, other translations are gradually made into French, German, and then well into the 1600s. There's some before that, but well into the 1600s, the English text that we now read. And the King James Version, by the way, does not appear until 1611. 1611. So it's many thousands of, hundreds of years later. And it is a translation. And this is something that is very powerful to bear in mind. That is not the original. It's a translation. And it's a 5th or 6th generation translation. So when we go back to the origins of our faith, all three variables, the land, the people, and the languages, point back to Africa. So Africa and African people are the foundation of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These so-called Abrahamic religions were founded consistently in North Africa. And the European influence does not come until much later, after, really, the so-called Dark Ages, with the beginning of what's called first the Renaissance in the 1500s, and then the Reformation, Protestant Reformation. There's, of course, some influence, obviously, by the Catholic Church for centuries, but this is due to the shift and translations and transmission out of North Africa into Europe. And because many of our ancestors in modern history came from West Africa and were enslaved and then, quote-unquote, converted, we have a tendency to think that that's the point of origin. It's not the point of origin. It just happens to be the point of our contact with the European interpretation of Christianity through the enslavement process.
Can I ask a question right there?
Yes.
You mentioned language, you mentioned translations. Would you care to expound on that with regard to the Ethiopians who managed not to be colonized as was the rest of Africa And then the contribution that the Copts made to in terms of the the language, the translations that were made. How much? I guess my question more specifically is: had the Arabic invasion not happened, how might the Bible be different in terms of translations?
Oh yes, if the Arabic invasion had not happened, European said this way: when the Arabic invasion occurred, part of what happened is that Europe was cut off from North Africa. And by being cut off from North Africa, it began to develop its own version, history, translation, perceptions of Christianity. That's how Christianity became, in a very real sense, isolated and then reshaped. If you don't have a constant connection with the source of your beginnings, and I mean the source of beginnings in terms of Christianity now, being located, an aspect of it being located in Europe, and that begins to cultivate its own notions about the Bible, about the people, about the interpretations. In a sense, it becomes a separate religion. And it becomes a separate religion that later on becomes dominant with the exploration of Europeans out of Europe into the Americas, into West Africa, into other parts of the world. Had that not happened, then Europe, this is my surmise, of course, Europe would have maintained a connection and an awareness of the African origins, not just as an idea, but as a reality. You follow me? As a reality. With the
yes, sir. I'm muting my mic, so I have to.
Okay, unmute. No problem. No problem. So, with the emergence of Islam, and remember, Islam emerged as an attempt to rectify what it believed were heresy, to put it mildly, within Judaism and certainly within Christianity. Christianity being perceived as somewhat polytheistic. But that cutting off meant that Africans in both the eastern part of the Roman Empire, because there was a split before that, but remember now, you had the Coptic Church, you had the Ethiopian Church, you also have the Eastern Orthodox Church that has a whole separate history that develops. So that's another factor, is that in the eastern part of Christianity, which is Greek and Coptic, etc., which is much closer to the source and origins of Christianity, develops an entirely different, but in some ways more continuous relationship with the origins of Christianity. And this can be seen in icons, it can be seen in the literature that emerges out of the Greek church, but also the Coptic church has as with Judaism, has a long history of connection with the origins of both Judaism and Christianity. Had that rupture not occurred, we would have had a much more sustained awareness and connection with documents that are now, quote-unquote, being revealed. Let's take the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas. I mean, the list kind of goes on now as these are being, quote-unquote, rediscovered. So yes, we'd have a whole different perspective we would have a whole different perspective, and so would the world, of the continuity between Africa and Judaism and Christianity. We'd also, I believe, would be more aware of the connection between West African spiritual traditions and North Africa, which is tremendous. We have the idea, I think, misperception, that there was nothing going on in West Africa until Europeans showed up. That's absolutely not the case. North Africa is part of Africa, is connected with West Africa, for centuries before Europeans appeared, for centuries with Islam, for centuries with its own indigenous faith, for centuries with perhaps even Kemetic or Egyptian wisdom. But we don't know more about that also because, again, language. We only work with English, unfortunately, especially as Americans, whether you're African American or otherwise. And lack of knowledge regarding other languages and other traditions means you don't have access to that information. That would open the door for better understanding even the spirituality of our West African ancestors who were not devil worshippers, who were not polytheistic, even though this has been stated about them. It would just reframe, as I attempt to do in the class that you took with me, reframe everything that we understand about ourselves, our own particular identity from West Africa. So that's a long response to your question, but that's how I imagine it would be different.
No, so then in essence, thank you for saying that, because then in essence, as an African people, we already had an understanding of monotheism that was not taught, that we can I would say it like this, that we can boldly say was not taught to us.
No, we have nothing to
in colonization.
Thank you for that. We have nothing to be ashamed of about our ancestors. The duplicity of believing that our ancestors were ignorant, pagans, is the curse. The curse is not the people. The curse is the lie.
Wait a minute. Pause. That was good.
Yes, I mean that.
Okay, I'm good. That was good.
Let me define what I mean. When a people seeks to colonize another group of people, this is just a historical truth around the world. The first thing you must do is delegitimate what they believe. You must convince yourself as a colonizer and convince them as the ones who are going to be colonized that what they believe is demonic and that what you believe is not demonic. Even though, here's the piece, you're the one who's doing something demonic. You follow my logic on that?
Yes, sir.
It's propaganda.
Yes, sir.
So if you want to colonize and justify what you're doing to someone else, you tell them that what they're doing is demonic, even though you're preparing to enslave them. You follow me?
Yes, sir. So I have to devalue you.
You have to devalue everything.
Man. We had this conversation yesterday.
Yes,
and throughout the class.
Everything. Their language, their culture, and most fundamentally, their belief system. And then you've got to replace it. Now, here's the tricky piece. You replace it not with the truth, but you replace it exactly as it was done, with portions of something that legitimate what you're doing. So you only share parts of information that will substantiate the wrong that you want to do. Slaves, obey your masters. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they're all quasi-Europeans. You got to say that some obscure text that you've misinterpreted about the curse of Ham justifies what you're doing when you know you're reading the text incorrectly. These are the kinds of things that are done. And then you forbid the people that you're colonizing to be able to read the text for themselves. Remember, it was illegal to do that. Right. Because if they read the text themselves, they discover other things in the text.
Right.
As subsequently has happened, and as we'll continue to do as a people. We are just now really at a point in our historical journey in the Americas, that is, where we have access to the text in a way that was never possible in the past. Not only for African Americans, but for people in general, to be aware of the things that we've been told about the Bible as in Porgy and Bess ain't necessarily so. Doesn't make it bad. It means the way in which it's been presented has been with another intention. So as I was saying, the more we learn about the reality, not the propaganda, the reality of our African indigenous spiritualities and culture, of Vodun, of Ifa, etc., the more we realize that they were monotheistic spiritualities and traditions. And like Catholicism and other Judaism and other traditions, they have other beings, but these beings function like angels or act like angelic beings. They're not the supreme being. And that many of the rituals that were prescribed and are prescribed in these traditions are extraordinarily similar to the Davidic codes, for example, in the Hebrew text, or even the sacrificial understandings that we have translated into our interpretation of Yeshua. The parallels are extraordinary once you forget about the foolishness you've been told about what your ancestors believed by people who had no interest in preserving the truth of what they believed and who were looking at it from the outside. You follow me?
Yes, sir.
And produce misdirecting movies and slow documentaries. It continues to this day. But when you take a deeper look, you're going to find, as I have, something to be much prouder of than you could ever imagine. Many of the rituals, many of the ways of thinking and speaking that we practice in the African church today are not derived from Europe. They are derived from West Africa. The similarities are amazing because you're talking about the same people, of course. And the similarities between us here, West Africa, and between West Africa and Northeast Africa is equally extraordinary and astounding. But you have to take the time, and most of all, you have to be willing to undo the lie, undo the propaganda, and see yourself, your history, your ancestors for the first time without the bias and without the propaganda in your mind. That's absolutely essential. You've got to be born again. I mean, born again with a new consciousness about the legacy and the power of what enslaved Africans brought with them in their bodies and in their minds, so that when they encountered the European interpretation of Christianity, hear me, this was not new to them. It was a different form of something they already knew. And let me add to this. We must always remember that the Supreme Being is not limited to one part of the world or to one group of people, but rather the Supreme Being has a sufficient way to be revealed to every people on the planet in their own context. So that in what we call the Old Testament, this Supreme Being is called, one of the names is Yahweh. When it is translated into Greek, it's Theos. When it's translated into Latin, it's Deus. And then centuries later, the word that we now use is not the word in the Bible. It's a German word, Gott. So when it's translated to German and then English, it's Gott. But this is not the word that's used in the Bible. You cannot find that word in the Bible, not in the original. That's a translation of a different word, and it's Hebrew. And these words are not identical. They have different connotations. So too, in West Africa, the name for the supreme being, two examples, are Maulisa or Olodumare, the owner of heaven, Olodumare, or Chukwu. So it is inaccurate to say that our ancestors did not know about the supreme being until those who enslaved them introduced their interpretation of the supreme being along with enslavement. No. We already knew. In a different form, in a different context, the divine power that had been revealed to us and that we brought with us in the bowels of the ship. The singing, the shouting, the call response, the ability to rhyme as we do in the African American church, the cadence, the beat, the hand clapping, the foot stomping. All that comes from our West African heritage in a new context.
Wow.
It did not abandon us, but others sought to have us abandon it. Meanwhile, retaining their culture. I told students just recently, we are surrounded by these European ideas, and we don't even pay attention to the days of the week, named after German and Roman gods and goddesses, the months of the year. We're in Mars month right now. You don't abandon your culture, quote unquote, because of what you believe per se. This culture is surrounded with European artifacts, names of streets. They don't abandon that. The language we speak is a Germanic language. It's specific.
I saw on Facebook the other day a young guy was visiting Rome, and he went to the Roman library, and in the Roman library are all of these artifacts acquired from Egypt, you know.
Yes.
And you're looking at the video screen, and the guy is saying, how in the world more or less you took all of this stuff, right? And he's saying, you know, this stuff belongs in Africa. This stuff belongs in Egypt. You know, you cannot separate Egypt from Africa. It is just as much part of Africa as Rome is a part of Italy.
Africa. As Rome is a part of Africa. Listen to me clearly. Listen to me clearly. They know. They know. The true patron saint of the Pope is the Black Madonna. Not the one that's paraded out for Christmas and Easter, but in their private shrine, it's the Black Madonna. They know. The headpiece that the Pope wears is the same one, a modification of the one that Osiris wears. The Good Shepherd crook that he carries, the bishops carry, that's Osirian. Yes, and Jesus is called the Good Shepherd. But these ideas originated in Egypt. Augustine said it best. There's nothing in the new religion that was emerging at the time that can't be found in Egypt. The reason we don't know this is because we have been, again, conditioned to undermine Egypt as a place of oppression. That's just one part of the story. But when the Hebrews came out of Egypt, they were Egyptians. And they took those ideas and they crystallized them in a different form that eventually became Judaism. The Romans believed that the Jews and the early Christians were just another Egyptian sect initially. You hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There's so much in church history that we have not been told by design. All those church fathers that you mentioned were black and brown people, including the one that everybody loves to talk about, Augustine. This was known. It was common. It was understood. If you wanted to be intelligent, Harvard, to use this modern example, was in Egypt. Cambridge was in Egypt. There were these institutions that later emerged.
Come on now.
And wasn't the Renaissance a result of rediscovering a connection with Africa through whom? The Muslims. The Muslims inspired the Renaissance.
Well, Dr. Coleman,
Muslim scholar brought Europe out of the Dark Ages.
Wow.
North African scholars and North Africa itself brought Europe out of the Dark Ages.
Wow.
So we just need to sit back, relax, and enjoy our own Renaissance, our own awakening. That's part of my mission, to be honest. We haven't taken the time now to study and learn Hebrew, Greek, Latin, etc. In addition to my training in theology, things that I was not taught in seminary because the people who were teaching me didn't know how to teach it, or didn't know, or did not care to share what they actually knew. You follow me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm not making this up. You know, you studied with me. Just Google, and then pay attention to what you see. Get rid of the script that you've been told. Stop watching TV. Pay no attention to Hollywood's lies that they trot out Easter and Christmas. And go and look at these variables that I've mentioned to you. Look at the land over history to this very moment. Look at the people historically now. And the sculptures, etc. In real time, I can show you images after image after image of Judeans during the time of the captivities and dispersions with dreadlocks and beards like mine and features like mine and yours, carved in stone, 700, 500 BCE. Where do you find lions of the tribe of Judah? That's a pharaoh, lion of the tribe of Judah. It's a description. These are not secrets, except the propaganda is one of deflection. So you see a movie, you see cartoon drawings and paintings that have nothing to do with reality at all. They're reconstructionists. They have nothing to do with the reality of who those people were and are.
Wow. Wow. Well, Dr.
It's a wonderful reframing of our minds, though. Once we can, and I'm saying this to your class, once you can just relax, don't be defensive, don't be scared, and just look and see the contribution of Africa to humanity Humanity began in South Central Africa. It makes sense. Thought forms about something other than oneself must have begun in the same place. Africa is the Garden of Eden.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I I appreciate you for providing that, because one thing that we set out to do was to at least start the process of deconstruction, so that we can get to a place of being open to the reconstruction, because essentially what the propaganda was about getting into your mind. And so one thing that I've expressed over and over is colonization did a great job of getting into our minds and isolating our understanding, isolating us from the truth, from ourselves. So thank you for taking the time to share with us. Certainly respect the time that you have given to a rigorous study of the culture, of the history, of our context as Africans, and so greatly appreciate you sharing of your wisdom and your knowledge. I'm just waiting on that book. I'm waiting on that piece of literature that you're gonna deliver, so that source can go into my library.
That's a good point, and I don't know exactly when that will be, because again, I'm very pleased. I record these lessons and I archive them, and there's a power in writing the text, and there's a power in maintaining the oral tradition, its organic nature. And so I may write a book sometime in the near future, but if I don't, I'm doing the book right every time I speak. I'm doing the book.
Amen. Amen.
So I just leave that with you.
Yes, sir.
And I appreciate also the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and hope it will spark more an ongoing inquiry with your students and your church and your congregation. I can only say, as someone who's come this far in the journey, the best is yet to come. Believe me, the more you know about the origins of the Bible, the more you know about the origins of Christianity from its African point of view, you will not lose your faith. Your faith won't be threatened. Remember, everything you believe now, someone told you that initially. But in contrast, it's going to become deeper and more powerful, because faith is substantiated with deep and profound knowledge of its real origins, rather than the hypothetical things that have been presented to us that have been, for the most part, propaganda. Let me just say one other thing that I've said to students. If everybody is reading the same Bible with the same understanding, how do we have such radically different outcomes? Now, what I mean by that, if you think of all the people just in this country who read the Bible, quote unquote, and yet a particular groups come out at different places in their socio-economic realities, reading the same book, something else is going on in terms of what they know about and how they are using the knowledge of the Bible. And in order for us as a people to come to another place, we've got to have a different relationship and a different knowledge about that book. And as we acquire a different relationship based on a different knowledge about that book, it's going to elevate where we go. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Makes total sense. Wow.
Something has been withheld from us. And that which has been withheld is what keeps us down. And as you said earlier, it's in the mind. It's in the mind.
One thing that
as you free the mind, you elevate everything else.
One thing that I have that I appreciated, one of my professors shared with me, was he said, whenever you're looking at a book, don't just look at the book at the surface. But he said study that book. He said, and the way that you study that book is you have to study the bibliography of that book. Look at the sources. Look at what was the author. Let's dig deeper into the topic of study.
Yes.
And that begins how the process of, like you said, unlocking the mind.
Yes. I have another similar illustration, and I actually will take a physical Bible in class, and I will hand it to a student, and I will say, when you reach out for this Bible, don't just look at the Bible. Look at the hand that's giving it to you.
Yeah.
What is the intention of the hand that's giving it to you? You follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Most
sir.
of us have been given the Bible historically by the same hand that put the chains on us. We must think about that intention.
Wow.
And free ourselves.
So I'm going on record, and I've said this, but I'm going to say it again. Christianity is not a white man's gospel. It is not it was not something that was exclusively developed by any European factor.
No. It was reinterpreted. But its origins are North Africa, Northeast Africa. And we are blessed that in this age of technology, we specifically can, if we take the time, go back to the original sources as best as anyone else can. That's the beauty. You don't have to take my word. You go check it out. You go and make your discoveries. You're not bound by the restrictions of someone making great pronouncements. And unfortunately, some of those pronouncements are against you, but for them. Now, you be for you, and see what marvelous things await you.
Well,
amen.
Amen. Well, Dr. Coleman, thank you again for, I can't say it enough, thank you again for sharing with us. If in case somebody wants to reach out to you or wants to follow you, do you care to share your social media, your website?
My website is www.willcoleman, WILLCOLEMAN.PhD.com. And then on that website is a contact us, a tab. You can send me an email through that link. There are also samples of my teachings on the website. You can reach me through Facebook, as you indicated. And I have also a channel with YouTube. And I do a Monday night class on Bible and meditation every Monday night. I have been doing it since 2009. You can contact me through that link from Eastern time. It's from about 8 to 9:30 on ongoing study. And then on every Thursday night, I just started this about 2 months ago now in January, I have a class on West African and African American spirituality / mysticism at the same time, and you can use the same link. So if people are interested, these are both pro bono. They're not free. They're pro bono. They're a gift to the public by the pro bono series of lessons. So tonight and on Thursday night. And if there's any other need for you or your congregation to get in touch with me, just let me know in advance, and we'll follow up on some of the things that have been hopefully sparked by this conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
We will sign off. Listen, y'all heard it from him, from Dr. Will Coleman. I am thanking him publicly for inspiring me in the class that I took with him, and it's just one thing that has made a life-changing impression upon my life. And so, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for sharing it. You be blessed, and everyone to be blessed.
Yes, sir. Will do.
All right.
Take care.
Peace.